everyone. That's lame. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for Medientage to have me here. I'm very excited. I was here last year virtually, and I'm here now in person, so I'm really glad to be amongst you. Just out of curiosity, who has seen this map before? Raise your hand. Great. For those of you who haven't, I'm known as the Media Cartographer because of this map. This is a map of the media universe. It represents 125 different companies. The x-axis of this map is the valuations of the companies on this map, the 125 companies on this map. So just math, publicly available information from the stock market or for earnings reports. There is OpenAI on here, and there are a couple of other companies that I use, information based on their raises. But ultimately, this map is scaled by the valuation of these companies. And I remake this map by hand in PowerPoint twice a month, which is exactly as painful as it sounds. Because I think the German word for PowerPoint is Scheiße. Did I get that right? Is that a good translation? By the way, the translation of oof is also oof. Who knew? I remake this map, and when I first made this map, it was meant to represent the shape of the media universe as I saw it. And I heard from a lot of companies in the middle here, the traditional media companies, that it wasn't fair that the big tech companies who really just dabble in media and use profits from iPhones and search to invade media and steal market share from us, but really don't consider it core to their business, that we put them on this map scaled by the same measure. And I asked the question in return, who told you life was going to be fair? Because it's not. This is exactly the landscape. When I first dropped this map about 5 years ago, it was not meant to predict or prognosticate. It was not meant to declare something that was going to happen. It was meant to announce something that had already happened, that big tech had already overtaken media. I'll give you an example. Who here has a smartphone with them? Okay. Who here has an Apple iPhone? Who here has an Android phone? Who here has something other than one of those two? Exactly, one person. So 99.999% of all the smartphone users on the face of the earth are accessed and controlled by just two companies, two big tech Death Stars represented on this map, Alphabet and Apple. And this was true then, 5 years ago, as it is today. This is a different map that I dropped last year, which reshapes the media universe by size of audience on the right-hand side and size of revenues on the left-hand side. And I don't go into these data visualizations with any preconceived notion, any confirmation bias that I'm looking to confirm. I go in and I let the data tell me the story, and then I turn it into a visual or a narrative. I follow the data where it leads me. But I did have a bit of a preconceived idea that the television was the center of the universe. Now, most homes, most video is watched on TV, even with younger consumers. The connected television, in my mind, was the home screen, is the home screen of the home. And yet, when I looked at the data and put this map together, at the center of it all was mobile, the biggest revenue, the biggest audience on the face of the earth, at the center of everything. And then the story emerged to me. I'll ask you a question again. Who here has a smartphone? Raise your hand. I asked you this. It's an easy question. Who here is their smartphone the first thing they touch in the morning? Who here is their smartphone the last thing they touch at night? Sorry for your significant others. But that represents what the smartphone is to us. It is at the center of our lives. We may be watching on other devices, we may be using different services, but at the end of everything, the smartphone is the remote control of our lives. It controls the media suite of services across audio and video, across social, across all the different services that we use. Big tech is in control, but the user uses big tech, that remote control, to control the media. And the story emerged to me then that we had left the last era of media. This was not meant to predict anything. This was not meant to prognosticate. It was meant to announce something that had already happened. We left the last era of media, the gatekeeper-led, the top-down era of media 5 years ago when Disney decided to go direct to consumer and all the streaming horsemen of the apocalypse followed them down the rabbit hole, regardless of the fact that they were abandoning advertising for a paid ad-free model and didn't really consider what it would do to their businesses. We left then the top-down gatekeeper-led era of media, and we put the user in control. And we entered, back then in 2019, the user-centric era. The user is in complete control of the media universe, complete control of what we do for a living. We now have to cater to them. We have to put the user at the center of everything that we do, or we risk losing them. Now, that era of media started 5 years ago, and we've been operating in it ever since then. And what you can see is there's been a tremendous amount of chaos over those last 5 years in our media ecosystem, mostly because the people who control media are not listening to their audience correctly. They're not putting the users at the center of everything. The last era of media was dominated by companies. This era of media is controlled by the user, and the user's voice is our data. And we have to pay more attention to the data to follow the rules of this new era. So I'm going to walk you through a whole bunch of data very, very quickly. I hope you speak English, because I talk very fast and I don't know German. But I'm going to give you the new rules of the road for the user-centric era, and I think we can look to a time where we're going to do more than just survive this new era, but we can actually thrive in it if we follow those rules. Is that okay? Okay, lame. Is that okay? Okay, great. So first of all, you have to start with who the user is. You have to know who your users are. On the planet Earth right now, the population of the planet is now almost 2/3 under the age of 40. So if you're over the age of 40, for many of you, for the first time in your lives, welcome to the minority. Super awkward. But then when you look at other territories, this is how sometimes some territories can feel out of step with the rest of the world. So the US is still majority under 40, but it's older than the rest of the world. Europe is super fucking old. It is. The majority of consumers or people in Europe are over the age of 40, actually over the age of 50. And there's a great economic crisis coming because of this, but I'm not going to get into that today. Germany is even older than the rest of Europe. So what happens is, because millennials and Gen Zers are the minority of this population, or a minority of the media users, their habits, unlike the US and other territories around the world, have not taken over the ecosystem fully yet. But here's the thing, and it surprises some people, get this, generations age. They grow older. Every year, more millennials get older than 40. The oldest millennials are now 43. Millennials, get this, are not kids, they have kids. Right? They're the majority of parents of kids under the age of 20. Every year, Gen Zers turn 27. They're 27 starting this year. They're going to enter the tax-paying base. They're homeowners, they're parents, they're members of parliament. So if you ignore the habits of the generations that will be in the majority very soon, when they are the majority of media habits in this ecosystem, you're going to be out in the cold. So it's very important to understand that this generational wave is coming, and in behind it is Generation A, who are now 15. In 10 years, they'll be 25 and working in your offices like this. And Latin America is almost two-thirds under the age of 40. Asia is almost two-thirds under the age of 40. And Africa is 51% under the age of 20. So when you're looking for new opportunities, these other territories, if you're shipping your content around the world, understand what these audiences look like and what shape they are. By the way, most of the fastest growing economies in the world are in Latin America, Asia, and Africa. So if you're looking for opportunities outside the region, look beyond the experience of your own desk. You also have to look at the media world through the eyes of the consumer. This is how the media consumer sees what we do for a living. All this great content available in all these different places, on all these different devices, whenever we want it, wherever we want it, at all times, right? Everything all of the time. But over the last number of years, we've layered on platforms and subscriptions and devices and services to the point where it's really a cacophony, a labyrinth of content that is very unnavigable. The average consumer now has 100 individual logins. 100 individual logins. which is why I use the same password for everything, which is 1, 2, 3. I shouldn't tell you it. I left my phone right there. So, but this is now a paradox of choice. There are studies on this. When you give the consumer unlimited choice, they make fewer choices. And we've created an ecosystem which is really full of friction and frustration for the consumer. Who here has logged onto a streaming media service, looked for something to watch, couldn't find something to watch, logged onto a different streaming media service, couldn't find something to watch, logged onto a third streaming media service, couldn't find something to watch, gave up, drank a beer, and just watched Friends? Raise your hand. We work in the industry. So imagine how frustrating it is for the average consumer who goes through that same process. What's interesting is, when you look at the user-centric era, content still is at the center of everything. When GWI asked 500,000 consumers between the ages of 17 and 26 what their streaming priorities are, it's content, 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 and content. Relevancy, the exclusives and originals, the refresh rate, and the library size. Cost, and whether or not there's ads, doesn't come into play until 5th place, or 7th or 8th place. In fact, ease of use is more important than whether or not there's ads on it. So in this new era, content is still king. But content, as we just discovered, is commoditized. And this is what the average consumer wants from their hierarchy of feeds: an elegant transformation, an elegant journey from one service to another. This is the various different media services by popularity. Reading is least popular at the top: podcasts, free video, gaming, music, premium video, social media. Remember reading, by the way? For consumers over 35, it's one of the most important uncancelable services that they have. And this isn't just big publications, it's newsletters like mine, Media, War, and Peace, which you can subscribe to on your iPhones and Android phones right now. I'll wait. It's not funny. But this is what we promised the consumer when we invented all this tech and infused it into the media ecosystem, this joy-filled, easy move from one service to another without having to jump through hoops. What we gave them was a friction-filled paradox of choice. The average consumer now has 13 different media services: paid and free, video and audio, gaming and reading, social media, right? But less than half of them, only 43% of them, are uncancelable, are must-haves. More than half, 52%, can be canceled and will be canceled at any moment when a consumer feels like it and goes into their system settings and swipes right, or left, actually, I guess in that case. Who here has signed up for a premium streaming service to watch something or binge something and then cancel before the next billing service? You're the problem. It's you. Serial churners are now 40% of all new subscribers of premium streaming. Who here has Netflix? Raise your hand. Who here has Amazon Prime? Raise your hand. That third slot, so those are the 2 permanent members of your streaming habit, right? That third slot is going to be a rotating cavalcade of services based on what drops on a service in any given month. And it's going to become increasingly competitive over the next number of years. Your goal as a media provider is to be in the top 48%, or the top 48% of all services, uncancelable, must have, touch as many times per week as I possibly can have my consumers touch them. Content is king in the user-centric era, but data is the bloodline. Data is the voice of the consumer. Data is how you can follow the rules of this new era and get to a place where you're more in relation to your consumers as you need to be. And most of the data is a bit confusing in our ecosystem right now. So much of our talk in the media world is about streaming. But in reality, in most territories around the world, the vast majority of television is still consumed in the pay TV and broadcast half of the media continuum. This is true in the United States. And by the way, this is this past August, this is Nielsen's data. You can see, yes, streaming took up 41% of all television usage in August, which is a lot, the high point for streaming so far. But almost half is still in pay TV and broadcast. This is true in other territories as well. But it's shifting. So if you look at the data, in the US, cable subscriptions are dropping like a hot knife through butter. Meanwhile, streaming revenues are climbing very quickly. but it's ultra competitive, and the growth is slowing. And it's not replacing one for one the revenues that have been lost from pay TV and broadcast advertising. Over the last 6 years, SVOD in the United States has grown 243%. In the next 5 years, it's going to slow down dramatically to just 22%, and there's far more competitors now. In Europe, you can see the vast majority of television is still on broadcast and pay TV. Now, part of that is because you have public service media here, which is free, and you're super old. So that combination is keeping the broadcast and pay TV ecosystem alive maybe a little bit longer than it will in the United States. But again, pay TV is dropping. Subscriptions are dropping more and more every year. And when you look at, well, this is actually an advantage that I think Europe, and particularly your territory, has, which is the public service media revenues. So yes, it's dropping across Europe, but look at the rate of dropping. It's really slowing. It's very slow compared to other territories. And in Germany, the vast majority of television is still viewed on pay TV and on broadcast, again, because of the history of public service media and the demographics. But pay TV is dropping really dramatically, very quickly here, and those revenues are going away with them, which means you cannot count on them to provide you budgets to create content. And you have this public service media here, this revenue here, $8 billion, right? So almost $9 billion, which is not going down today. Right now, it's flat for a number of years, which is actually the new up when you consider pay TV and broadcast revenues. But remember, those Gen Zers are going to be 37 in 10 years, and are they still going to want to pay into the public service media dole on a regular basis? Not if they don't watch it. So I am here in part to make a plea to continue to support public service media, because the health of a democracy is proven to be directly correlated to the health of public service media in that territory. And if you want, a good example of what happens when you don't have a vibrant public service media, I'm from the United States. I don't know if you're paying attention, but that's what happens. Right? And so you really need to continue to support it, both for the health of your democracy, but also for the health of your content ecosystem. These dollars are going to become increasingly important for high-quality German content over the next decade. Without it, it's going to be harder and harder to produce good factual and general entertainment content and scripted entertainment here. But what's happening is, because streaming revenues are slowing down, so they grew like a rocket over the last 6 years, 255% growth over the last 6 years, but it's slowing down, only 28% over the next 5 years. And it's now more competitive than it's ever been. There are more players in it than there were previously. So these revenues are going to, these resources, these budgets from the big tech companies and from the big streamers like Netflix, these are going to creep out of the ecosystem. They're not going to fully fund as much as they have in different regions around the world on a moving forward basis. They're going to be looking for co-productions in region and different windows in region, and that's where those public service revenues are really, really crucial for the vibrancy of your content community. You have to understand not just the data around viewership, but also the data around who controls the user endpoint. So that last millimeter of glass is controlled by very few companies. In the US, Roku controls half of all televisions, 3 times its next closest competitor. Kind of interesting. But in EMEA, Amazon is actually the top provider of new televisions, connected televisions in the region, followed by Samsung and then Roku and a couple of others. These are the folks who control that last millimeter of glass between you and your end user. And you have to understand that they are now increasingly taking revenue out of the marketplace and also wielding increasing control over how things get seen. You have to know who the important players are. It's not just the satellite companies. It's not just the pay TV providers. It's not just the broadcasters and the greenlighters. It's the tech companies as well. And not just the big tech companies, but other tech companies as well. So these are the new gatekeepers. These are the new hecubuses that get you to your end consumer. You have to go through them and cooperate with them, and very often compete directly against them for revenues. And you have no choice. But you have to understand these are the players, and you have to know how they operate. I used to call them frenemies when I worked in the cable industry. I now call them collaborators. So these are folks that you need to bear hug and keep close to you and work with to get to that end consumer, but you're also competing directly with them for revenues and eyeballs. It's a very fascinating dichotomy. When you look at how things are playing out, and again, I use the US mostly as a case study of what's going to happen here, because we're younger than you, and the habits there are coming here as millennials and Gen Z and Gen A age. In August, and this is viewing time by corporation, right? So this is all of NBC Universal, which includes NBC and all their cable systems and Peacock. And this is Disney, which includes ESPN and Disney Plus and Hulu and ABC, a broadcasting company. And this is Netflix, which is just Netflix. And this is YouTube, which is just YouTube. One channel versus many. One channel versus many. And a couple of months so far, YouTube has been #1. But it has never creeped down below 10% of television viewing. This is on TV. This is not on phones. This is not on laptops. YouTube is the #1 individual channel in the United States. And by the way, it's increasingly the #1 individual channel in most territories. Who here has kids under the age of 15? How many of them watch YouTube on TV? How many of them watch YouTube on TV regularly, many times per week or once a day? So that's an increase. Who here themselves watch YouTube on TV? Yeah. That habit is growing and growing and growing. In the UK, I'll show you in a second. Oh, actually, but just to go to the economics here for a second, despite the fact that a lot of this is streaming, right? And there is this great belief in streaming is the monster of all things. When it comes down to advertising, so this is ComScore, and this is big data, and this is a report I just dropped a couple of weeks ago. Most of the ad time, most of the ad impressions, most of the share of ad voice is still in cable and broadcast, because a lot of it's viewed live, and they have bigger ad fills, and they have more daily touch points. 87% in the first half of the year of ad impressions generated on TV in the United States were from cable and broadcast, just 13% from streaming. So when Netflix gets these big numbers, like they did here, most of this, 97% of their viewing is ad-free. And they're getting into the ad business. So it's important to understand where the ad impressions are being generated. In the UK, which is also super old, when you look at total viewing year by year, you can see that broadcast still holds on to a decent percent of their audience. But for all viewers in the UK, YouTube is now #2, and Netflix is now #4, ahead of Channel 4 and the rest of the pay TV and broadcast universe. When you look at over 35, you can see that broadcast has an even more dominant position. So really dominant for BBC, really pretty good for ITV. Even Channel 4 and Sky do much better with the over 35 crowd. Now look what happens when you go under 35. 1, 2, and 3, YouTube, Netflix, TikTok. YouTube now gets more viewership in the UK than all of the broadcasters and pay TV combined for consumers between the ages of 16 and 34. And by the way, also for under 16 as well. This is what, and every year, new millennials turn 35. Every year, Gen Z creeps closer to the majority of the over 35 crowd as well. This is the wave that is coming to Germany, and here's how I know it. Well, this is Europe, so you can see in Europe, this is streaming on connected television. In Europe, YouTube is the #1 channel by a lot. Now, this is not a necessarily fair comparison, because this is all of Europe combined, plus the UK, who doesn't consider themselves part of Europe anymore. I do, but that's not really important. But you can see it's dominated by the big tech platforms. And when you add up all the YouTube, so this is YouTube, YouTube Premium, YouTube Kids, Google TV. When you add up all the Amazons, this is Amazon Prime and Twitch. What happens is it's an even more dominant position for the big tech players. Now let's look at Germany. You can see Netflix is #1 in this market. YouTube #2, Amazon #3, and this is streaming on connected television. Disney #4, and then the broadcasters and the local players come in after that. And streaming is increasingly becoming the habit here. But when you add up all the YouTubes, and by the way, all the Amazons, here's Freevee. Fast is growing fast in this market. It's actually one of the fastest growing markets for Fast outside of the, actually, I think it's actually maybe the fastest growing market for Fast in the world right now, because it's flattening out in the US and it's growing here. But when you add up all the ownership and all the YouTubes, YouTube Premium, YouTube Kids, Google TV, this is what happens. Amazon is the #1 provider of streamed content in Germany. YouTube is #2. Netflix is #3. Disney is #4, and then all the rest behind it. So I think a lot of time and energy is spent by regional players thinking that they're competing against each other. They're not. If you collaborate and work together and cooperate, these are the folks that you're competing against. By the way, Amazon is not just the biggest streaming content provider in this market. They're also, remember, the largest provider of TVs. So they now control a huge part of the ecosystem here. And then you have YouTube, and Google Android is also a TV maker as well. YouTube usage in the United States, 60% of YouTube usage in the US is now on connected television. This habit is coming here as the generations age and as the technology improves in this market. Meanwhile, those of you who are in premium streaming probably already know this. The premium streaming business is really hard. It's a slog. There's a lot of people signing up, but then there's also a lot of people canceling. In 2023, all of premium streaming gained 165 million new subscribers, but then they lost 141 million new subscribers. This churn-pocalypse, this revolving door, which we just talked about, is really an existential crisis for the premium streaming world, which is why they're now very much investing in FAST. There are 2,000 FAST platforms on the planet Earth. This is the most popular genre for FAST in Germany. This is according to Samsung, by the way. Kids, entertainment, movies. This is a really good opportunity, not just for the content library owners, but also the content producers themselves to find ways to get merchandise and monetize their content on a moving forward basis. And what's more important is the combination of AVOD and FAST is now the fastest growing segment of advertising out there. So you can see it grew 212% in the last 6 years, but it's still growing at a pretty good clip, 48% globally. When you look at Europe, it grew 350% in the last 6 years, but still growing at a pretty good clip, 85% over the next 5 years. And in Germany, 1,300% growth. You know, when you start from zero, it's pretty hard not to get a big percentage. But it's still at 134% growth. And I think this is a conservative number, by the way. This is from Ampere Analysis, and this is a projection that they're making. But I believe that this will actually grow much faster over the next couple of years than what's projected here. On the flip side of that, though, this is what happens when you don't cooperate, when you don't collaborate, especially around your data. 68% of all advertising on Earth goes to pure play digital, non-TV. Right? So money is moving there. And the reason for that is because in pure play digital, I can project which consumers are my most likely to buy my product. And I can track the advertising through the entire journey all the way to transaction. Yes, there's a decent amount of fraud in this ecosystem, but I'm still able to track my return on my investment from an ad in the digital ecosystem much better than I can from traditional platforms like TV, like broadcast and pay TV. Of that advertising, and this is 2023 numbers, of all the advertising on Earth, 3 companies control almost 60% of all advertising, not digital advertising, all advertising. And the reason why no one gets fired for buying more Google or buying more YouTube is because I know whether or not it worked. I can commingle my data with Google's. I can project which consumers are my most likely buyers. I can track the ad all the way through the journey to the completion of a transaction. On Amazon, same thing. The goal now is not CPMs. The goal now is not demographics. The goal now is action, transaction. It's about hearts and carts. It's about butts and trucks. It's about hands on cans. That's what advertising is turning into. Yes, branding still definitely has its place. But we need to know whether the ad was watched and if it had an effect. That's what the digital ecosphere offers advertisers that the pay TV and broadcast ecosphere cannot. But you can change that. If you collaborate, if you take the walls of your gardens down and stop thinking about your data as my precious, and collaborate radically, commingle your data in a protected way, in a privacy-protected way, so that the advertisers and the brands can come to you with their first-party data and create a profile of their most likely buyers in your ecosystem, and then track the journey of the ad all the way to transaction. Most media buyers would prefer to buy traditional television, pay TV, and broadcast because it's content safe. But they're going to pull more and more money out of it every year because they don't know the answer to whether or not it worked. This is the choice that consumers have. And by the way, when you think of consumers, don't only think of the audience. Think of the advertiser as well, because they are providing a tremendous amount of the value that lets us make the stuff we want to make. Soap operas are called soap operas because of advertisers. That's an American thing, but you get my point. This is the choice right now that consumers have and advertisers have when they turn on that home screen of the home, the connected television. And for many consumers, yeah, they'll still go to the traditional providers. But for most consumers who are now turning 35, 36, 37 years old, these are the ones that they're going to go to. And the data screams it loud and clear. There is a new wave of media coming. There is a new budget that you can tap into. There is a new gold rush happening on television. This is what Trade Desk projects is going to happen just in the United States on TV with retail media. So retail media started with stickers on the floor of grocery stores and shelf hangers and things like that. But this year, Amazon will do $50 billion in retail media. This year, Walmart, which is a big store in the US, will do $6 billion in retail media. Trade Desk says that retail media on television will be a $6 billion per year business just in the US by the end of this decade. That's going to come here. That's going to come to Europe in a big wave. The question is, do you want some of this money or not? Because if you don't do anything, if you don't radically collaborate, if you don't use your data well, you will lose to YouTube and Google and Meta and Amazon, because they will provide better tracking, better projection, and better return on investment, provable return on investment than can traditional media. That's why most broadcasters, ad agencies, platforms, and publishers are now investing very heavily in their data stack. First-party data, clean rooms, the ability to mix your first-party data with your advertisers' first-party data or your cable provider's first-party data and project where my money will be best spent. I'm targeting buyers, not demographics. But again, unless the traditional media ecosystem shares its data, there's no way that your data pool can ever get large enough or effective enough to effectively compete with Google and Meta and Amazon. How do I know that? Well, I'll get to that in a second. I changed the order of these slides last night, and now I'm screwing myself. The creator economy is now the most important part of the advertising ecosystem. The consumers know this. Who knows who Mr. Beast is? Raise your hand. He's the biggest star in the world, although he's in a little trouble right now. But creators are now the biggest stars for most consumers out there. And the advertisers agree. They're moving money out of traditional media and professionally produced media to creator-led media at a very heavy clip. And social media use is gigantic in Europe. And it's dominated by very few companies. Facebook, Meta. And this year, Meta will sell as much advertising as the entire traditional television ecosystem on the planet Earth. One company. Because I know where my money is going and whether or not it's working. And here, do you know the John Wanamaker quote, "I know half my advertising money is being wasted, I just don't know which half"? That's what he was talking about, traditional media. And by the way, that quote came from 1927, and it's still used every day in the advertising community. The creator economy is going to be a $500 million business before the end of this. I'm sorry, a $500 billion business. This is billions of dollars. The creator economy will be a $500 billion business before the end of this decade. It will be a $1 trillion business by this time next decade. And the question is, do you want some of that money or not? Put creators into your ecosystem. Lean into the same efficacy that the creator social media world does. I'm going to be digging in at 4 p.m. today. I'm doing a masterclass right across the campus here, and I'm going to be digging deeper into creator economy content and financial enterprises as well. So if you can make it to that, I highly Would love to see you there. So I'm not talking to an empty room. But we're going to dive deep into how the creator economy works and how it can work for traditional media. This is really the home screen of the home. Gaming, audio, social, all competing for the attention of the consumers. Retail media coming even faster every day to the big screen. This is where you should be thinking about your competitive set. And again, thinking about competing together. By the way, when you think about YouTube, don't only think about that one free version that many of us use. Think about the bundle that they've created. First of all, this is a survey of 3,000 consumers on what they will never cancel. This is the US, but what services they will never cancel. You can see Spotify's #1, the lowest churn in all of media. Why? Who here has Spotify? Raise your hand. Who here has ever thought about canceling Spotify? Okay, a couple people. And by the way, look, there are 3 different music services on here. So music is a touch point every day. It's the soundtrack of our lives. It's the ultimate media utility, to be honest with you. And that's why YouTube does so well. Between YouTube Premium, YouTube TV, and YouTube Music, they've created the perfect bundle. It's not actually a bundle. They don't sell it that way. But for a consumer, because my logins are all the same, it acts as a bundle for me. And it's full of daily touchpoint utility. Think about that as you think about your enterprise. So if you're a publisher out there or you're a pay TV provider, think about the utility of your bundle. Used to be you could just provide broadband and TV, and that was all you needed to provide. Now that's not a competitive set. Who here has Amazon Prime? Raise your hand. Who here has thought about canceling, or even though they raised their prices recently? Okay, a few people. But did you cancel? No, you didn't cancel, did you? Why? Free shipping, the ultimate utility. That is the new super bundle. When you dig into it, Disney Streaming does really well with their bundling. So these are the churn rates, the cancellation rates of their 3 video services. This is the average churn rate for the 3 of them combined. And this is the churn rate of the Disney bundle. It almost halves. So bundling absolutely works. But just bundling video doesn't work as well as bundling utility with video. And here's how I know. Apple has an 8.3% churn, highest in the entire premium streaming industry, right? But when you look at Apple One, which is a combination of Apple TV Plus, Apple Arcade, Apple News, Apple Fitness, Cloud, churn is 2.9%, almost 75% lower. Because it's utility, because it's stuff that I use every day. So if you're a platform provider, you have to be thinking about the utility you can offer your consumer. Not just more video bundled with more video, but mobile, audio, other elements that make you uncancelable, that force the consumer or makes the consumer want to touch your product every single day, not just once or twice a month. This is how the average consumer sees the media ecosystem. They use that piece of glass that they touch first thing in the morning and last thing at night to wield their power over the rest of the media ecosystem. They change their inputs on a whim based on their mood in their system settings with the swipe of a thumb. You need to be in their lives in a more active way on an ongoing basis. We are, unfortunately, I believe, since streaming became mainstream, in an innovation stagnation. We provided streaming, and that was about it. The personalization is not great. The ability to move from service to service is not great. That one user interface that the consumer sees either on their phone or on their television sucks. It's terrible. It's very frustrating. We talked about not being able to find something to watch. On the flight from Cannes to Munich yesterday, I talked with folks from the television industry, and we all agreed that discovery is actually the main issue with our platforms right now. That's our fault. We did that. The average human now has 100 unique logins. And as a result, they're making fewer choices. In the last year, from 22 to 23, the average consumer on the planet Earth cut back on a half an hour of media per day. And that's not about putting down glass and going out and touching grass. That is about canceling services, canceling Snap, canceling Max, canceling one of my music services, canceling one of my reading services, so that I can free up time to find content on other platforms. The average, this is TiVo, 4,000 consumers surveyed, by the way. In 2022, TiVo counted 9.9 average services for, this is video services for the consumer. In 2023, that went up to almost 11 on average different TV services that they used. This year, in the first half of this year, it dropped to 9, down 8% from 22, down 17% from 23. Consumers are frustrated, and as a result, they're using less of our media, which means we get fewer dollars from them from advertising and subscriptions, which means we have fewer dollars to make the stuff we love to make. This is going to continue to happen unless we find a way to work together. The paradox of choice is real, yo. The poor user experience is our fault. We did this. We can also fix this if we decide to work together and collaborate around our data. But if we don't, this frustration, this paradox of choice is going to get even worse, and consumers will use even less of our services, and we will have fewer dollars to make the stuff that we want. This is the hierarchy of feeds, the elegant transition from reading, including Media, War, and Peace, which you can subscribe to on your phones right now. I'll wait. Again, not funny. Reading, podcasts, all the way down through social media. They want this elegant transfer of services from one to the next, this elegant journey, this joy-filled journey, and we have not provided that. When you look at this ecosystem, it is more fragmented and competitive than it ever has been, which, by the way, plays into the plan of big tech. They know that's the case. They have infinite resources. These are the most valuable companies in the history of humankind. And they have more resources from their other businesses to interlope into media and take more and more share out every year. The last era of media was defined by his master's voice. RCA's tagline, they invented television. This era of media will be defined by the user's voice, by the audience's voice. And data, content may be king, but data is the voice of our audience. They are telling us what they want. They are telling us they're frustrated. They're telling us what we need to do. The question is, are you listening? If you put your user, you have to have a unified user strategy. What does your user love to do and why? And then think about your user, not your business model. Because if you think about your user and you put them at the center of everything you do, your business model will emerge from their behavior, from the things that they do with your content. If you put your consumer at the center of everything that you do, if you think about your users as the core of your business, and by the way, that doesn't mean just your audience. That means your employees. That means your culture. That means your staff. If you're making decisions in those windowless conference rooms in your headquarters without people under the age of 35 in the room, you're going to get lost. I promise you that. If you're making decisions in these same windowless, stuffy conference rooms without people who grew up too poor to afford the combination of Netflix and Max and Apple TV Plus and Spotify and all these other services, you're going to get screwed. You're going to miss the important things that your audience is telling you. So put your user at the center of everything you do. Ingest your users and your consumers and your audiences into the culture of your companies, and you can do far more than just survive in the user-centric era. I promise you, if you do this, if we collaborate together, if you put your users at the center of everything you do, we can thrive. Thank you.